Hi, I'm Norman Liss, and the name of the program is The Way to Go. I invite you to join me as we explore places to go and things to do. People who visit New York City have a number of wonderful things to see, but those who come from a distance, unfortunately, are faced with only being able to see the highlights. Those of us who live closer are able to delve into some things that are much more interesting and maybe not quite as obvious. Several years ago, I discovered a book called New York's Nooks and Crannies by David Yeadon. It really takes you into places to go that you wouldn't believe, and it has become really my favorite guide to New York. I recently discovered that David Yeadon is a resident of Westchester County, and he is my guest today. And we're going to see what he can tell us about interesting things to do and interesting places to go in New York. David, welcome to the show. I'm pleased that you were able to come here today, and I have one question that really fascinates me, and I've been waiting for the opportunity to ask you. And that question is, you cover 16 walking tours of New York in Nooks and Crannies. How did you find these places, and how did you determine which of them you were going to feature in the book?
It was a real hit and miss thing at first. It was mainly talking to a lot of people. I came out of Britain, so it was mainly talking to a lot of people who'd lived in New York for a long time and possibly explored it much to the chagrin of their fellow New Yorkers who couldn't understand why they were going out at all hours and exploring some of these strange places. But I found that the one thing that fascinated me about New York was that even though there must have been 100, maybe 150 guidebooks written about the city, somehow they always seem to miss the heart of the city. They seem to miss the key areas where you would walk and you would find yourself among people who were not part of the power set, not part of the jet set, but part of indigenous neighborhoods.
You've now written 4 books about New York.
4 books on New York, yes, I think it is.
And was Nooks and Crannies your first?
No. I started off by doing a book called the New York Book of Bars, Pubs and Taverns.
Yes, we have that here. It's quite an interesting, and of course, since you're an illustrator and a photographer as well as an author, I think the cover, which certainly shows some of your work, is an interesting and sets the tone for the book.
Well, the reason I did that was not because I wanted to do a guidebook on the bars and pubs, but primarily because when you go to places like Maxorley's and to Pete's Tavern and to places of that kind and Old Town Tavern on 18th Street, you go into a New York where the whole history of the neighborhood is in the bars itself. That you find the history in the old Irish taverns, in some of the Polish taverns, in some of the taverns in Brighton Beach and places like that. And I wanted to try and tell a history of New York using the bars and pubs as the way to sort of explain to people, just how New York had grown, how it had developed.
But your research actually was not only in the bars and talking to the patrons and the owners.
No, it was going into the history and finding it. I mean, it's fascinating, some of the places. I mean, Maxorley's is almost now becoming too familiar as a place that where the Irish history of New York has become focused. But of course, Brendan Behan's chair is still there, and Peter Cooper's chair is still there. But there were many more bars and pubs where you could still find the sort of indigenous culture of the city. And this is what I kept looking for. I kept looking for places where you could actually find a real New York, a place where you weren't just going to sort of yuppie-type restaurants, you weren't going to places where millionaires lived, but you were going to the old neighborhoods of New York that were the neighborhoods that made up the original New York, the Irish neighborhoods, the Jewish neighborhoods. And this is what that book was supposed to do.
What came after that?
What came after that was, a brief period where I got fascinated by the incredible range of free things to do in New York. The thing that amazed me about New York, which is such an incredibly expensive city, is that of all the cities in the country, and I've possibly been to most of them, New York had more. It was like a showcase. It was a showcase of everything. It was a showcase of restaurants. It was a showcase of shows. It was a showcase of films. All of these things you could focus in on, and you could find free things to do in all these various areas. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of free things to do. So that was the essence of that book.
And the name of the book is Free New York. What's the 1500 in the cover stand for?
Well, the 1500 means 1500 free things to do in New York, but in fact, when you actually add them up, there's more than 2,000. And other people have taken a similar idea with New York and tried to do the same thing. But this was the first book where we tried to really concentrate and really focus in on the fact that New York, albeit the most expensive city in America and one of the most expensive cities in the world, is also one of the cheapest places if you know where to go and what to do. I mean,
name one.
The number. Well, the better known things are things like the wonderful tours that you can take of Grand Central Station that are free. The tours you can take of the Central Reference Library in 42nd Street. The Urban Ranger tours, which are tours that are offered by the urban rangers who run out in Central Park and take you all around all various parts of the city. But not only that, there are theaters where you can go. You can go to the Stage Company on 42nd Street, 44th Street, and you can see things there which are incredibly exciting in terms of seeing whole shows or reading the shows and that kind of thing.
It really is
and then of course, and then the food. I mean, there are places where there's a place called Molly Moggs on 54th Street where you literally can go, and for the price of a seltzer water, you can literally help yourself to a complete buffet.
I thought there was no free lunch.
This is free. This is free snacks at happy hour, actually. So we did a whole thing on that alone. We did a whole thing on the snacks and the freebies that you can get at happy hour, and the fact that even food in New York is free if you know where to go and look for it.
And then of course there's another book, and that's New York: The Best Places, which is a completely different aspect, because certainly the best places are not free.
Well, the Best Places was really an attempt. The idea of Best Places was to try, and most of the guidebooks that are done on New York, unfortunately, and this applies to many other cities, are guidebooks where you really have like 700, 800 pages to plow through, and it's okay for somebody living in New York, but for somebody coming in from the outside, it's really very hard to actually digest, to extract from huge 1.5-inch thick guidebooks the things that you want to see, the things you want to do, the things you want to eat or whatever. So I thought, how can we design a guidebook where, particularly outsiders, but also New Yorkers who are actually amazingly ignorant about their own city. I mean, New Yorkers, in terms of exploring the other 4 boroughs, are very, should I say, reluctant to leave the Big Apple of Manhattan.
And that certainly holds true for people who live in Westchester.
It's amazing. It's amazing, whether it's a fear or whether it's a feeling that somehow you just come into town to do a theater and do dinner and then go back home again. It's hard to explain. But somehow there is a tremendous reluctance on the part of people in New York to explore New York. Now, people living in Jersey, I mean, they some nights you walk around New York and you almost have a feeling that the place is populated by nothing but New Jerseyites. But New Yorkers themselves, even if you talk to them about, going to places like, say, Arthur Avenue, which is, to me, one of the most exciting Italian neighborhoods in the whole of the city, in the Bronx, 187th Street and Arthur Avenue in the Bronx. It's far more authentic authentic, not quite so visually overpowering as Little Italy, but far more authentic. Excellent restaurants, some of the best bread in the world, 50 different kinds of olives. But, you know, you could talk to a Manhattanite, and I used to be a Manhattanite for 8 years. I was a resident of Manhattan. And I would sort of go to them hoping that they would give me some indication of where to go. I found those people to be the worst people of all. I mean, they'd never been. Some had never even been to the Bronx Zoo or the Botanical Gardens. Coney Island, forget it. You know, Coney Island.
I know some people who live on 73rd Street and First Avenue, and they very, very rarely go outside of a 10-block radius of where they live.
Yeah, it's hard to explain. I think there is a snobism in Manhattan, and I can only compare that to my time when I lived in London, that I found the same thing, that if you lived in certain parts of London, to go even more than 4 or 5 miles from your Chelsea residence or your Kensington residence was considered to be, I mean, why? We have everything here. And I think there's something of that in New York. There's a feeling of, you know, whatever's out there is
for tourists.
It's never yeah, exactly. It's never going to be anything compatible to what we have in New York, even though they have lions and tigers and that kind of thing.
And yet people come from all over the world to visit New York, and the people who live in or near New York City don't partake of those. I've said this before on this program.
Yeah.
And it is amazing to me. But now let's get back to my favorite, and let's get to good old Nooks and Crannies. And it really sets the tone beautifully in the illustration on the cover, which is a map that shows all the boroughs, but in a very light, imaginative way. And these walking tours, did you actually walk these tours? And
every single one of them, some of them more than likely 4 or 5 times, because in order to get a feeling for each of these areas, I felt the only way to do it was to see it at different times of day and different days, go at the weekend, go during the week, whatever, and try and get a feeling for, you know, what happens, for example, what happens in Brighton Beach at night as opposed to what happens in Brighton Beach during the day. During the day, actually, it's quite quiet, except for the L, which makes it noisy all the time. But at night, when the restaurants are open, places like the Zodiac and the Piroshki and the Odessa, the place just becomes
that's Little Odessa.
Wild. It is Little Odessa, yeah. Even the boardwalk is quite, until they had some problems down there, it was pretty wild at night, too. But I just felt a need. I mean, for example, another thing, too, if you go down to Brighton Beach at 11 o'clock in the morning, you will find on the coldest of winter days, so long as there's a bit of sun, you will find these older people, the grandmothers, sitting out there on these summertime aluminum deck chairs, wrapped up in the furs with the great fur hats on and the fur gloves on, and just having a ball. I mean, and the wind is blasting down the boardwalk.
They call that a sun park.
Yeah, yes, and they all have their own little niches, but you have to be there for a certain time, because after lunch, for some reason, they disappear. I think they have big lunches and go to sleep or something. But if you're there at 11 o'clock, and then usually again about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you'll see them there. So, in answer to your question, I had to keep going back to test out the different places.
I have some favorite places that are covered in your book, and I discovered them through your book. Some of the little courts, for example, in Greenwich Village, Grove Court, for example, and Patchen Place.
Yep.
How do you discover them? I didn't discover them until I read your book.
Well, I was lucky in those particular instances, because I was living at that time in the village, and so Patchen Place and all these little mews and these little hidden corners were really part of my daily walk. I mean, if I was walking over to 6th Avenue, I would past Patchen Place, which is right by the Greenwich Village Library. And I just, even in my first week in Manhattan, I think I was sketching around there, because it's one of the most sketchable places in the whole of Manhattan. Of course, sketching has always been a very important part of my books.
Which comes first to you, the sketching or the writing?
Well, actually, ironically, that's a long story, but when I began this 20 years ago, most of my books began as sketchbooks. I'm an architect and a city planner by training, and I used to do a lot of urban design, and of course buildings, and particularly in America, the wonderful Victorian Gothic architecture. I mean, I've never anywhere in the world seen extravagances like we have here in the Victorian era. And of course in Britain we have some pretty wonderful elaborate buildings with gargoyles and all that. But usually they're all done in brick or stone or something very solid and enduring. But especially in California, they were all done they were all made out of wood. Beautifully carved wood, carpenter Gothic wood. We don't have carpenter Gothic wood in Britain.
But you've compared the Woolworth building, for example, to Gothic palaces.
Well, yes, the Woolworth building actually is one of my favorite places in Manhattan, and God knows why I didn't sketch that for the book. I think I did try a sketch, and I think it was just getting so rich and so overcrowded with these creatures. You walk into this building, and at first it's quite modest. The doorway is very imposing, but the irony about the Woolworth building is that it's an enormous structure, the first skyscraper built in New York, and yet it's quite a human scale. A lot of the other buildings that we've done since then, including the Chrysler building and things of that kind, tend to be rather overpowering in scale. But the Woolworth building is initially quite low key, very rich, beautiful woods and marbles and steel grills
going
and
into the lobby.
But then it becomes almost like entering a small but a very exuberant cathedral. And I think what impressed me most of all, coming from England, was that we have some of the finest Gothic cathedrals in the world in England, but most of them are what they call late Gothic. And of course the Woolworth building is a Gothic style building. And the problem with the late Gothic was that they didn't have fun. I mean, the church became a place of incredible reverence, and everything was done by the book, and by this time they were sort of building it like...
So you call the Woolworth building a fun place?
It's a fun place because it goes back to the early form of church architecture, which they call the Romanesque, which is where they had tremendous fun with gargoyles and little carvings of devils and tremendous intricacies of stone carving.
You talk about...
it's almost like carving for carving's sake, and you feel this joy in the Woolworth building.
You talk about fun, and I think of a wonderful building called Twin Peaks in the Village, which is certainly nothing like the Woolworth building.
Well, the Twin Peaks on Bedford Street is one of my favorite because it is possibly one of the most idiosyncratic buildings in the whole city, missed by most people. In fact, that whole area of the village...
It's right around the corner from Grove
Court. And Grove Court is also one of the most enticing, again, tremendously easily missed. You walk off Hudson Street, down Grove Street, and unless you look to your right as you're walking down Grove towards Bedford, you are going to miss it. I mean, it's all you can see is a little gateway that's about 8 feet wide, and if you walk past that, you've missed one of the most beautiful sights in the whole city. And what it is, like the places you mentioned, like Patchin Place and Mulligan Place, they were built as workers' cottages. They weren't built in the grand townhouse design of some of the other streets in that area, with the brownstones and the elaborate staircases. They were just places usually built on a bit of spare land in this very strange juxtaposition of all the streets in Greenwich Village. There were always little patches of land that people didn't know what to do with. And so they built cottages for workers in restaurants and workers in hospitals or whatever it may be. And this is what Grove Court was. And then as you go down Grove Street, you turn left, and then there's a wonderful little yellow building, a little yellow clapboard building, which is, I mean, it's so unusual in Manhattan to see a two-story, a small two-story, wooden clapboard building. I mean, you don't expect to see that kind of thing in the middle of the Big Apple. You expect to see at least pompous brownstones. And then next to that is this building that Otto Kahn took in the 20s, I believe. And prior to that, it was quite a standard-looking building, but he put on these wonderful, it was really a satire on a gable, but these roofs that fly away and these eaves that sort of hang over the street. And it was built, there are various stories about it, but it was built I think, for a group of artists, and other buildings around about were used by the same group. But then you come down the street, and then you find a little place like Chumley's, which is one of the most hidden bars. It used to be a speakeasy, which would explain...
With the entrance through a courtyard.
Through a courtyard, right on the corner of Bedford and Barrow Street. And it was just it's a remarkable little pub. It's become a little, maybe thanks to my book, become a little bit more known than I would.
I discovered
that I would like.
Well, I also discovered the old Merchant's House, and through your book now, there is a remarkable house because it was occupied by the family for many years.
Yeah.
And
that's at Lafayette and 4th, and that is. It's sad to think, in a way, that was how much of that area used to look. I mean, that wasn't built as a one-off. There were a lot of homes in that area that had this kind of. It's not a overpowering large place, but it's a 4-story house with just a sense of refinement.
And you feel as if you're really back in that era because it has been preserved with its original furnishings.
It's almost like Amsterdam, and of course, New York was New Amsterdam. It has many qualities about it which are Dutch, including the narrowness. Which reminds me, just going back to what we were talking about a second ago, by Chumley's, if you go down Bedford Street a little bit further, is it 75 and a half, is the tiniest house that you've ever seen in your life. I think the actual length of it is 9.5 feet. The Edna St. Vincent Millay house, and it sold. I remember seeing it in the paper last year. Sold for $485,000, and you got a 9-foot street frontage.
Just one bay wide.
One bay wide. Yeah, and I hope to go there and look in, but unfortunately it was sold before I had a chance to go and see it. But I mean, the narrowness of the houses is something that's very characteristic of. Ironically, of Amsterdam. I mean, Amsterdam is a city where every inch of land counted because it was a place where they had to dam up a lot of bogs and had to fill in, and the land was tremendously expensive. And I think the Dutch influence persisted all the way through the village. Everything was narrower than it really had to be.
What really amazes me to listen to you as a New Yorker, talking like a New Yorker, you lived in New York, but you're not from New York originally. You obviously are from Great Britain. You went to California and worked as a city planner.
That's right.
We've been talking today about your books about New York. That's 4 of your books. But the current count is over 20, isn't it? 21, and I think the 22nd is coming up. And you also write regularly for the Washington Post, the New York Times, and many other publications on the subject of travel.
That's right.
How did you get into this travel writing business?
Well, it's a long story. It was really a sabbatical. I'd been working for like 12 years as an architect planner. And I decided that I deserved a rest. And my wife had also been working with the blind. This was both out in California. We'd just come from Iran, then we moved to California. And there was something about California that encourages one to look at one's life a little bit more closely and say, what am I doing? And we decided that we'd take 3 months. And we'd just go traveling the back roads and traveling in what everybody used to do in those days, in a VW camper. So we set off, and my company very kindly sort of said, okay, if you want to come back, we'll hold your job for a few months. And we set off with no real plans as to what we were going to do. I knew I wanted to sketch this wonderful Victorian Gothic architecture I told you about. Mm-hmm. That was crucial. But beyond that, there was no real scheme that we had. We just wanted to go and explore for a while. And gradually, I started to get fascinated by the history. You see, the thing about coming from Britain to America, even in New York, is the fact that all the history is so relatively recent. I mean, last time I went back to Britain, I rented a 14th century house in the Yorkshire Dales of England, which is my home territory. No big deal. I mean, the whole village was 14th century, 15th century houses. But to come to a country where really everything, pretty much, especially in California, has happened in the last 180 years, 200 years. in California, much less than that, was so exciting. I mean, to come to a place where there hadn't been Roman troops wandering through. There had been Indian tribes and things of that kind, but there had been none of this long history in Britain where wherever you dig in the ground, you're going to find a piece of Anglo-Saxon or a piece of ancient Neolithic pottery or something of this kind. Here, everything is invented fresh. And that's what the architecture said. So I went off to sketch this and try and capture this freshness. And I got fascinated with the history of the small towns. So I wrote a book called Exploring Small Towns of California. And that led to a second volume. And that led to another book and another book. And after about 2 years, I said to Anne, well, do you think it's time we went back? Do you think it's time we went back to, to do some city planning? And she said, whatever your heart tells you. My heart told me just to keep on writing books, so that's what I did.
Now, the book, of course, on New York, the books that you've written in New York, you've written about other cities as well, haven't you? Have you done other Nooks and Cranny books?
No, I haven't written so much on other cities, except cities that I've included in other books like Backroad Journeys of Southern Europe and Hidden Corners of Britain. And the more recent books I'm doing are much more all-encompassing. I mean, they literally cover the world. But the books, I did 5 books on New York, and then we both decided to take off and travel Europe for a while. Mm-hmm. I've done books on the West Coast, back roads of the West Coast, and things of that kind. Now I'm working on an idea to do a book called Wild Places USA, which is still to show people that America, that the USA is still wild. It's not just the national parks. Way beyond the national parks, there are gorgeous areas. I mean, just the whole theme of what I do is hidden corners, back roads, mm-hmm. Nooks and crannies. I mean, that's why Nooks and Crannies of New York. The whole theme is, if you just go away from the standard things, the standard package things, the guidebook tours and all that, and just let go, just set off and see where your legs take you, see where your car takes you, see where whatever.
And that's what you've done. You've just
I guess it is.
Gone into all places in the world. Yeah. And I'm sure it's taken you into some wonderful adventures. And
it has.
The material that you write for the Washington Post, that's not generally tourist-type material of places to go. It contains more of your own feelings and emotions.
Yeah, I was lucky. I wrote for another paper that shall be nameless, but with an even larger circulation than the Washington Post. And we constantly had fights because they wanted more the tourist type thing.
David, I've got some bad news for you, and that is we've run out of time.
Oh, what a shame.
However, there's so much more to talk to you about.
I mean, I can get in some air-conditioned environment now. That would be a shame.
I would really like to invite you to come back and do another program with us. Would you come back and do that?
I would love to.
I'd love to. And I really would like to explore some of the other things that you've done.
Absolutely.
And why don't we do that?
Absolutely. I'd be delighted.
We've been talking today with David Yeadon, artist, illustrator, author, photographer, and we've been talking about his wonderful book, Nooks and Crannies of New York. I'm Norman Liss. Enjoy yourself.